You ever notice something about storms? They're not trying to wreck everything. They're just, I don't know, energy that needs to go somewhere. And I think that's what happens with chaos in our lives too. It's just energy looking for a place to land. I used to think some people were just wired different, like they had this calm gene or something. You see them when everything's going crazy and they're just there, present, not freaking out. Then I got older. Life started happening, real life. And I realized something. Calm isn't this thing you either have or you don't. It's more like a skill, something you get better at, like riding a bike. Except the bike is your nervous system and the road is whatever's happening around you. I mean, I've been in situations where staying calm wasn't really a choice on sets, doing action stuff, but really just being alive, Those moments where if you panic, people get hurt, including you. And your body, it'll do what you've trained it to do, but only if you've actually done the training, not just hoped it would work out when the time came. There's this thing I started noticing about people who stay solid when everything's shaking. They're not avoiding the mess. They're not pretending it's not happening. They've just figured out how to be more constant than whatever's trying to knock them around. Like a lighthouse, sort of. Storms hit it, waves crash over it, but it just stays. And that steadiness becomes something other people can use to find their way. But most of us, when things get intense, our whole system just hijacks itself. Let me tell you what I mean. So when chaos hits, your nervous system does this thing. It's like it starts borrowing tomorrow's energy to deal with today's problem, which is fine if there's actually an emergency happening. But most of what we call emergencies, they're not really emergencies, I started noticing this during stunt work. There's this feeling you get right before a big take. Your whole system wanting to spike. Heart rate jumps, muscles tense up, mind starts racing through everything that could go wrong, and I realized that same exact mechanism was running my whole life. Traffic jam, same response. Difficult conversation, same response. Email from my agent, same response. There's this moment though, right before panic actually sets in, where you have a choice. Most people don't even know that moment exists. It's like this split second where your system's revving up, but hasn't fully engaged yet. But when you've trained for it, when you know it's coming, you can feel it like weather. You can sense the pressure dropping before the storm hits. Your nervous system, it gets conscripted by whatever's happening around you. Someone's freaking out, you start freaking out. Sirens going off, your body thinks it needs to run somewhere. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to. It's just never been shown another way. I mean, think about it. We teach people to drive, to swim, to use computers, but nobody teaches you how to work with your own nervous system. We just kind of hope it figures itself out. I started thinking about emotions like waves. They have this natural rise and fall, right? Most people, when a big wave comes, they either try to stop it, which is impossible, or they try to ride it perfectly, which is exhausting. But what if you could be more like the ocean floor? You feel every wave that passes over you, but you don't get moved by them. You're just there, constant. I remember doing this underwater sequence once, and the director kept saying, "Don't fight the water, work with it." And I thought, what if that's true for everything? What if instead of fighting the chaos or trying to control it, you just learn to be unmovable in the middle of it? So I started experimenting. What if I could become sort of weatherproof, not avoiding storms, not hiding from them, but just being the kind of person who doesn't get blown around by them? What would that look like? What would that feel like? And that's when I discovered something interesting about immunity. See, immunity doesn't mean you don't feel the storm. It means the storm doesn't get to decide who you are while it's happening. I don't know if you'd call this a method. It's more like noticing patterns, noticing what stays constant when everything else is moving. Like there's always something that doesn't change, even in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it's your breathing. Sometimes it's just the fact that you're still you, I started paying attention to small moments. Someone cuts you off in traffic. That's a tiny storm. Your phone dies when you need it. Tiny storm. Elevators taking forever. Tiny storm. And I realized every one of these little moments is like rehearsal for the big stuff. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between practice and performance. It just learns whatever you teach it. Think of it like this. You can't control the weather, but you can become the kind of person who's equally comfortable in sun or rain. Not because you don't notice the difference, but because neither one changes your core temperature, I guess. On film sets, there's this thing called holding focus. No matter what's happening around you, lights moving, crew talking, director yelling cut and doing it again, you maintain your character's internal state. Everything else is chaos, but your character stays consistent. That's what this is like. I remember doing this scene where everything was going wrong. Equipment breaking, people stressed, schedule falling apart. But I had to stay in character, and I realized I could do that in real life too. External chaos, but internal consistency. Storm immunity isn't about being emotionless. It's not about not caring or disconnecting. It's about your emotions not being hijacked by external turbulence. You feel everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the pressure, but nothing gets to move your center. You're like anchored to something deeper than the surface waves. I started noticing people who had this quality. They weren't the loudest ones in the room, they weren't trying to control everything, but when things got intense, everyone would kind of gravitate toward them because they were solid, present, not adding to the chaos. And the weird thing is, the more you practice staying steady in small storms, the more automatic it becomes in big ones. Your system starts to trust that you know what you're doing, that you're not going to let external circumstances dictate your internal state. It's like building muscle memory, except instead of your muscles, it's your entire way of being in the world. The key to all this, though, is what I started thinking of as your internal thermostat. Here's what I've noticed about calm people. They have this internal temperature that doesn't fluctuate with external conditions. Like they've got some kind of emotional thermostat. Everyone else is heating up or cooling down based on what's happening around them. But these people just stay at their setting. I started experimenting with this idea. What if you could install your own thermostat? And I found this technique. I call it the exhale reset. Not the inhale, that's what everyone focuses on. But the exhale, that's where you release what isn't yours to carry. You know that feeling when you're in a hot room but you're not hot? Maybe you just came in from outside, or you're just not affected by it somehow. The heat is there, you're aware of it, but your internal climate stays steady. That's what this is like. The chaos is there, you're completely aware of it, but it doesn't get to set your internal temperature. I started practicing this in small ways. Notice when your internal temperature spikes. Don't try to fix it, don't judge it, just notice. Feel where it sits in your body. Most people carry other people's anxiety without even realizing it. Someone's stressed, you get stressed. Someone's angry, your body starts preparing for conflict. But what if that was optional? The thing is, emotions have this physical signature. Anger sits different than fear. Anxiety feels different than sadness. And once you start paying attention to where these things live in your body, you can start to not take them on automatically. I remember being on set with someone who was having a really bad day, just everything going wrong for them, and I could feel my system wanting to match their energy, But I tried this thing where I acknowledged their situation without absorbing their emotional state. Like I could be present for their experience without making it my experience. There's this moment when you realize, I can feel this situation completely and still choose my response. That's when you know your thermostat is working. You're not disconnected, you're not cold, you're just not being controlled by external temperature. But here's the thing about finding your steady. Once you've got it, you have to protect it. Not selfishly, but like, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? You can't calm others if you're running on borrowed energy. You can't be solid for other people if you're not solid for yourself first. I used to think that meant being kind of isolated or selfish. But it's actually the opposite. When you're not being thrown around by everyone else's emotional weather, you can actually be more present, more helpful. You become like this stable reference point that other people can use to find their own balance. It's like being the one person in the room who's not panicking, not because you don't care, but because panic isn't going to help anyone figure out what to do next. But what about when you're in the middle of actual chaos? When the storms aren't just emotional, but real, immediate, in-your-face chaos? I used to think mastery meant control. Like if you were really good at something, you could control the outcome, control how things went. Then I learned the difference between controlling a situation and not being controlled by it. One's impossible. The other, that you can actually learn. The people who stay calmest in chaos aren't the ones who don't feel it. They feel it completely, the fear, the uncertainty, the pressure, but then they ask this question, what part of this is actually mine to handle? Because most of the time, when everything's falling apart, only a small piece of it is actually yours to deal with. The The rest is just noise. I started noticing something about calm people. They have this quality, they're sort of like gravity, not pushing or pulling, not trying to force anything, just constant. And that constancy becomes something others can depend on. When everything else is moving around, they're the fixed point. And there's this thing that happens with energy. The energy you bring to chaos doesn't just affect you, it echoes. If you're panicking, everyone around you feels that. But if you stay calm in a crisis, you give everyone around you permission to find their own calm too. It's like you become proof that it's possible to not be overwhelmed by whatever's happening. I remember this one time, everything was going wrong on a shoot. Equipment failing, weather not cooperating, everyone getting stressed. And there was this one guy, I think he was the key grip, who just stayed steady, didn't get rattled, didn't add to the drama. And slowly, everyone else started to settle down too. Not because he told them to, but because his energy was just solid. There's this thing that happens when you become unmovable. Suddenly you can see solutions that panic blocks. Your mind works better when it's not fighting for survival. When you're not using all your energy just trying to stay afloat, you can actually think clearly about what needs to happen next. It's like the difference between being in the middle of a storm and watching it from somewhere safe. Same storm, but your perspective is completely different, and perspective changes everything. What looks impossible from inside the chaos might have a really simple solution when you can see it clearly. The weird thing is, the more steady you become, the more other people start coming to you when things get intense. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're not adding to the problem. You're not making the situation more chaotic than it already is. And that's when you realize being calm isn't just about you. It's about what you make possible for everyone around you. But here's the real question. How do you maintain this when life just keeps coming? When it's not just one storm, but storm after storm after storm. Life isn't one storm, it's weather systems. Some days are calm, some aren't. Some weeks everything flows, other weeks it's just one thing after another. The goal isn't to avoid weather, it's to become the kind of person who can handle any forecast. I check in with my internal temperature throughout the day. Not obsessively, just aware, like glancing at a compass when you're hiking. Am I still pointing north? Am I running hot because of something that happened an hour ago? Am I carrying tension that isn't even mine? It's funny, once you start paying attention to this stuff, you realize how much energy you waste. Most of the energy you spend isn't on actual problems. It's on worrying about problems that might happen, or trying to control things that aren't really yours to control. Someone else's mood, how a meeting's gonna go, whether it's gonna rain. When you consistently stay steady, something interesting happens. People start coming to you during their storms, not because you have all the answers, you don't, but because you're solid, present. They know you're not going to add to their chaos or try to fix them. You're just going to be there, steady, while they figure out what they need to figure out. I think that might be one of the most valuable things you can offer someone, just being unshakable while they're going through something difficult. Not advice, not solutions, just constancy. And the compound effect of this is interesting. The more you practice staying calm in small situations, the more automatic it becomes in big ones. Your nervous system starts to trust that you're not going to let external circumstances control your internal state. It stops going into emergency mode for every little thing. But then there are times when you need more than just daily maintenance. Times when the storm is so intense, so immediate, that you need emergency protocols. Real emergencies have a different energy signature. Your body knows the difference between actual danger and manufactured urgency. Like when something's really wrong, there's this clarity that cuts through all the noise. But when it's just drama, just someone else's crisis becoming your crisis, your body feels that difference too. When chaos is active and immediate, you don't have time to think your way to calm. You either have it installed or you don't. That's why all the small practice matters. Your nervous system needs to trust the process before the moment when you really need it. There's a switch you can flip, from reactive to responsive. It's physical. It's in your exhale, in your posture, in where you place your attention. Instead of your attention scattering to everything that's wrong, you bring it back to what's actually happening right now in this moment. What needs to be done, what's actually yours to handle. The method works not because it's perfect, but because it's practiced. Your nervous system trusts what it's rehearsed. If you've only hoped you'd stay calm under pressure, hope is all you've got. But if you've actually trained for it, your body knows what to do even when your mind is overwhelmed. I mean, it's like any other skill. You don't learn to drive during an emergency. You don't learn to swim when you're drowning. You learn when it's calm, when you can practice, so that when you need it, it's just there. And this brings us to who you become when you live from this place. I don't know if this will make sense, but once you know your own steady, once you've felt what it's like to be unmovable, that becomes something no storm can take away from you. It's like discovering you have this solid ground inside yourself that you didn't know was there. You're not trying to become someone who never feels shaken. That's not the point. You're becoming someone who knows how to find their center again, quickly, reliably, someone who can feel the storm completely without being swept away by it. The storms will come. They always do. Personal storms, family storms, work storms, world storms. But you'll be ready. Not because you're stronger than the storm, but because you're more constant than the chaos. Because you've learned to be the steady thing in the middle of all the moving pieces. And maybe that's enough. The method isn't complicated. Notice the patterns. Train in small moments. Protect your steady. Trust the process. Your nervous system already knows how to do this. You're just giving it permission to be what it naturally wants to be when it's not being hijacked by external chaos. You already have everything you need. The calm is already there. You're just remembering how to access it, how to trust it, how to be it, even when everything around you is moving. The storms will come. You'll be ready.